I'm going to start. Okay, recording now. Sweet. All right. Tēnā tātou, we have moved to Zoom, to a much more reliable platform, and we are very lucky to still, well, I'm very lucky to still have David and Lou here with us, and Kate Rayworth. That looks a lot different. Kate Rayworth, a few decades ago, perhaps. No,
with a Kiwi accent.
With a Kiwi accent. So I thought it would still be useful if we ask some of those quick fire questions and then get to the more substantive questions. So Lou, I was actually really keen to hear how you would describe procurement to a 5-year-old. Yeah, would really love to hear your whakaaro just on that question.
Cool, tēnā koe, Tamatha, and yeah, well done in the professionalism of getting through that. So yeah, it's my pleasure to be here tonight from my bubble here in the Tinakori Hills in Poniki, my tūranga waiwai, the place I stand. Great question. How do I describe procurement to a 5-year-old? Well, in my case, it's kind of how I explain it to my 7-year-old. Governments, businesses and organisations need to buy things, you know, to make and sell the things that we all need and want, and things that keep their businesses running. It could be as simple as hand sanitizers or hand soap that they need to provide their staff to keep them safe, or as complex as buying all the goods and services to build a $9 billion railway system. Good call out to Chloe on that one. You know, when governments and businesses buy these things, these goods and services, we call that procurement. And the really important thing to think about is what else can be achieved when these things are purchased. And you know, when a business is buying hand soap, could they buy it from a company that provides 100 jobs for people with disabilities? If $9 billion gets us a railway system, why shouldn't it also provide long-term job opportunities for people who have struggled to break through barriers to get a really good job? And you know, thinking about these additional valuable things and buying the goods and services from businesses who deliver them is what we call social procurement, and that's the game changer. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to understand what procurement means.
Thank you. Yes, very good, very easy, and I'm going to replay that one for my nieces and nephew because I think it's a very important concept to understand, especially as we start working and understand, I guess, the value and how much power we can actually have when we really harness I guess the resource that these big organisations and institutions have. And so, actually, Chloe, I might ask you Kate's quickfire question. I mean, the starter dough is hard to top, but if you have any whakaaro or thoughts on if the recovery from COVID-19 was a food item, what would you describe it as? This is a quick on your feet one for you.
I'm not allowed to give you a soliloquy, Brian. That's going to be a bit difficult. I'm just going to tautoko what Kate said for those who may have missed it. And I think fundamentally the notion of something that is generated off the back of community goodwill and kind of redistribution. So I guess actually another analogy would probably be something like a fruit tree that was planted by a generation prior. You know, that kind of notion of the essence of wisdom or generosity is planting a tree for which you will never sit under the shade of. So I think for me it's something akin to that. It's regenerative, it's restorative, and it does a whole lot more than simply providing people with kai.
Me. Awesome. That's an awesome answer. Damn, that is why you are...
Shortest answer you'll ever get from a politician.
Good stuff. Kia ora, thank you. And David, your one, I was really, really keen to hear your answer for this one as well. And so this is something that's actually come up and I've been asked as well. And it's pretty straightforward, and it is, why are climate activists trying to pull silver linings from a time that is full of suffering and misery, essentially?
Tēnā koe, Tamatha. So, I mean, from a kind of academic term for this, is like, this is a moment of critical juncture, a sort of moment where history can take a turn in a different direction. And I think it's a bit like when you're trying to do radical change, in sort of ordinary times, it's a bit like trying to change your tire on a bicycle while you're still riding the bicycle, you know. There's a lot of momentum going, there's a lot of dependence on the sort of bicycle rolling along like it is. But at a moment of critical juncture, it's like the tire just blew up and you've got to like pull the bike over and you've got to like lay it down, you've got to change the tire. And, you know, while you're changing the tire, you might want to, you know, retune the brakes. You might want to polish up the frame. You might want to put a new frame on. You know, there's an opportunity to really make that bike anew. So that's the kind of moment where a critical juncture kind of throws everything up in the air and you can change it. And so, yes, people are kind of taking this opportunity to talk about climate change and biodiversity loss and these issues. And I just make two little points that, you know, they're not the only ones that are jostling for influence at this time. There's a lot of vested interests who are also getting in there and trying to return things to the way that they are. So they're not the only one playing this. And the second thing is I just think there is a risk for the issue to seem a bit opportunistic, you know, for anyone to seem opportunistic in this time. You know, people are concerned about their safety and their security and their livelihoods as they lose jobs. That has to be the first priority. And there's a risk of coming across callous if you coming across as callous if you try and push an agenda too strongly. But I think, you know, there's a real strong case for pointing out that addressing issues like climate change, addressing issues like biodiversity loss, like trafficking of animals, which was a core cause of the COVID-19 crisis. You know, if we address these issues, they do make people safer and secure in the long run. So it's a matter of putting that case forward as well.
Perfect. Ngā mihi, thank you. And my final quickfire question is for you, Kara, and actually comes in after over the weekend seeing quite a few articles in the media about iwi imposing their own rāhui. And I just wanted to know, why do you think it is that iwi are taking it into their own hands to impose this when the government have set it out essentially themselves already?
Kia ora mai tātou. I guess in response to that question, my gut response is because they can, and they will, and they have, and it's just awesome to see it. The word that comes to mind is mana, or the phrase mana whenua, and if we look at the Treaty of Waitangi, it's sometimes assumed that the Treaty of Waitangi sort of, or the creation of these things called post-settlement governance entities give mana to these iwi, when in actual fact it just affirms it. It affirms that these iwi have mana within their rohe and their tribal area. And mana is about authority, but it's also about responsibility. It's, in order to have authority, you've also got to have responsibility. And by them putting up their rāhui and their boundaries and their means that they're just performing their function as mana whenua. And as we sort of transition into the 21st century, and we've got amazing judges like Judge Joe, you know, it's about bringing tikanga into our legal structures and legal frameworks. And what they're doing is performing tikanga. They are placing a rāhui within their context. And if you look at Māori, and the nice response to this, I guess, is they're doing it because they're protecting their community. And if you go to the urupa, the burial grounds of these small communities and of the iwi and hapu around this country, you will see a whole number of graves there marking people who have died because of influenza, the Spanish flu, a whole number of things. And so there's a historic trauma there which they're responding to, but also there is a reality, and the reality is that these small communities are incredibly vulnerable. If And I don't want to call them vulnerable communities, because they're not vulnerable communities. They're potent, they're rich, they are diverse, they are strong. But if a disease like the coronavirus enters a community like that, it has the ability to really wreak havoc on their social fabric, and wreak havoc on families and communities. And these iwi members who are putting up these rāhui are performing the role of protecting their interests and protecting their whānau and protecting their hapu and their iwi and their community. And good on them, good luck, go hard. And I guess, I also want to say I'm just a Te Ātiawa boy down in Wellington. I have no sort of authority or whatsoever in those spaces up where they're doing it. But here to tautoko them and their kaupapa and what they're doing. Yeah, kia ora.
Well, tēnā koe, that was a really well thought out and I guess insightful answer as well. So ngā mihi for that. So I'll move on now to our more substantial questions, and do feel as comfortable as you want to talk as much or as little as you want on the topic, given the, I guess, disruption already to today's kōrero. I'll really just take what I can get at this point and really appreciate all of those well thought out and thoughtful and comprehensive and creative answers that you all just gave to those quickfire questions, which are framed as, I guess, funny and light, but very well thought answers to those. So the first one was for Kate, and actually Chloe, you were going to ask Kate this question, and that was around donut economics and Aotearoa, and actually what kind of an interaction there is there in terms of the recovery from COVID-19. So I wonder if you feel comfortable, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but did you want to talk a little bit about donut economics, a circular economy in Aotearoa, and what that might look like in the post-COVID recovery?
Ka pai iho. I mean, I definitely probably couldn't speak with anywhere near the level of eloquence that Kate could as an Oxford economist, let alone somebody who's written an entire book on it. But I am currently a postgrad student at Vic studying public policy. So there's some overlap somewhat. But I had the good fortune of sitting down and yarning with Kate actually last year when she was over here speaking about our shift to a economy with well-being measures being predicated as something that we had more weight on, as opposed to solely, the flawed measure of GDP. GDP is a really fascinating measure, and I'm sure probably David or Lou or anybody in here could yarn to this effect in far more depth. But in a nutshell, it's effectively a measure that was invented in the 1930s, and the inventor of it took it to Simon Kuznets took it to the US Congress and was like, hey, here's a really good way to measure the interactions or the transactions between individuals across the economy at large, but God forbid do not use it as the measure of welfare within society. And 70 plus years later, we all did that. The reason GDP is a flawed measure of the well-being or the welfare of society is because it doesn't necessarily measure, it just doesn't measure the distribution or the quality of those transactions, right? So the common example that's used is GDP goes up when someone's in a car crash, or there is an oil spill, or somebody gets cancer, or there's some kind of social ill that ultimately ends up requiring economic transactions to be undone. So the way that Kate kind of proposes the donut economy is to think as though the economy is a donut, that being the dough that formulates the donut is the safe and just space for community to operate and exist in, or a society to. The middle or the hole, which you don't want to fall into, is the kind of limits or the floor for rights and freedoms and humanity to express itself, whereas the outer kind of edges of it are the planetary limits. And when you start overshooting, you get into this space of immense carbon emissions, which obviously lead to global warming, climate change. You get into ocean acidification, which leads to further climate change, water degradation, obviously deforestation, which David could talk a lot better about. But you, on the other side of things, if you're not maintaining a kind of social democracy, you also risk losing the kind of buy-in of everybody in society, and people don't necessarily have those rights and freedoms that they would otherwise enjoy. So it's ultimately about maintaining that balance. And I think to the core of your question, Tam, we have a really rich and fascinating history in Aotearoa, New Zealand to draw upon and to actually rectify and to genuinely attempt to pay real heed to. And that can be found primarily in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, but also on the wealth of academia and, you know, passed down history and new creativity and innovative ways to interact that has kind of been spawned subsequent to that. So I think fundamentally, as far as the perspective that I could possibly bring to this, it probably begins with reimagining our central government and in turn our local governments, and therefore the interactions that we as citizens all have with them. And that brings into that dialogue, you know, questions such as obviously the kind of value that we place on our environment, but so too the value that we place on future generations in terms of education. You know, we're speaking right now in the context of, I think you guys have Robbie Nicol next week, but, you know, Robbie just released the Citizens Handbook with his whole team. And, you know, citizens education or civics education has always been really crucial and important to me, because I see education as a way to educate people, and particularly like these brilliant young little minds, to think creatively and constructively and to become citizens, as opposed to trying to fit round pegs in square holes and going, hey, we're going to make you a worker who can only do X, Y, Z. You know, if society falls apart or the wheels fall off, to use David's analogy about the bicycle, you want people who can figure out how to constructively put things back together and to problem solve creatively. So I think on a broader sense, if we're talking about a donut economy, it's about valuing people and the connection that they have to the land. And in the context of Aotearoa New Zealand, it's about valuing that relationship with tangata whenua and placing Indigenous knowledge, particularly with regard to biodiversity, front and centre.
Miharu, that was amazing. Great work. And
just a few things where I could go through.
just off the top of the head, just no preparation, just, yeah, I mean, here's my take on that one. Oh, I can't wait for you to properly be on next week. Thank you. No, thank you. That was a brilliant answer, and I think really puts it into context, and hopefully we get another chance with Kate in the future. But we've also got Cleve on the line, and Cleve, you have a question for Lou, and I'm really excited and stoked that you're actually able to do that. So if you want to jump on and ask your question, we will be uploading this later on. So fire away.
Oh, kia ora. Sorry, I've only just checked in now, actually. But yeah, Lou, so in terms of a post-COVID-19 marketplace and economy and so on, what do you reckon are going to be the key things that are going to help a business thrive in this new economy?
Yeah, kia ora, Cleve. Nice to see you. And I understand you are doing pretty well in finding Wi-Fi where you are. So great that you were able to join us.
I've driven down the road, actually.
Good on you. Clearly safely within your bubble, so that's good. Yeah, I mean, this is a crazy time, right? The last, you know, to think a couple of months ago, you know, lots of people were saying, you know, 2020, this is the year, you know, we coined that this is the year of impact, and my goodness, is it what? You know, in my view, and in the view of many people, and it's been really great to see a lot of big conversations over the last couple of weeks, is this is absolutely the time to be bold. This crisis presents, you know, unprecedented opportunity to shape our economic future, as Chloe just said, and you know, we can do so much better than simply returning to business as usual. You know, we need to build a new economy for New Zealand where the positive impact generated from businesses, government, from charities, all improves the well-being of our people and our environment. And we need an economy that is absolutely resilient. It's focused on regeneration, and it's absolutely inclusive. And we all need to play a part in that. So, to answer your question, I think that my challenge to businesses hoping to thrive in a post-COVID economy is, 4 different areas. First, if you're starting up, and a lot of businesses have figured out that what they were doing before just doesn't exist anymore, and you think tourism as an example. But if you're starting up, think about how your new business can provide solutions to the absolutely huge social and environmental challenges we face. How can your good or service provide positive impact for people on the planet? If you're lucky enough to have got through the last month or so, and you're up and running and thinking about how do you move forward, how can you talk about the impact that you're having? How can you look at it and improve it? Really, really important as we start talking to our employees, our customers, our communities where we operate, is talking about how you're contributing. It's going to be a massive, massive benefit for businesses that can show that they are in it with the rest of us, that they are doing things that are absolutely contributing to us as society and what we need in this post-COVID world. I talked a little bit before around procurement and what that means, and it's buying stuff. So if you are a business and buying goods and services, prioritize buying positive outcomes for New Zealand through your procurement. Who are you buying your things from? Is there a local company that can supply you that good or service? Is that local business able to deliver more benefit, more social and environmental outcomes? If they are, give them your business, and also make sure that you're paying them on time, because it's really important in this, as we grow, that we have cash flow coming through our economy. And in that regard, if you are investing, if you are really starting to scale and thinking about where you can put your profit as a business, invest in organisations that create wellbeing outcomes. There's lots of them around there. So partner well, invest well, buy well, start up well, run well. It's all about being committed to what we really hope will be an economy that the planet and people thrive in. Because at the heart of it, we have to all be committed to this. We need an economy that we absolutely need and deserve as we come out of COVID-19. Because let's be honest, a lot of the challenges we face were here before. COVID has, absolutely, brought some
Mother
of them
Nature just blew the whistle.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that's the crazy thing, right? Is that we didn't live in utopia, so we've got a lot of things that we need to do differently. COVID has made it really, really clear on what some of those things are, and we're going to see massive impact on mental health. We're going to see massive impact on domestic violence. We're going to see massive impact on people really, really suffering financially, because lots and lots of businesses are going to have to start again. But they are starting again in a planet that is also really hurting. So it's really, really important that we look at that and think, how can we all contribute to it? And the last point that I will make is that let's value what we all care about. The one thing that we all know, because we've all sat in our little bubbles where we are, some are slightly longer than others, like Chloe. But what are the things we've missed the most? As much as Twitter says it's KFC, I really don't think it is. It's connection with others. It's our communities. It's being able to, see your friends and your loved ones. That's the things we care about. So we want to make sure that we're building an economy that values that and absolutely values the planet in which it sits upon. And if we do that, if we are bold enough to do it, then we will look back multi-generations from now and go, gosh, that pain, while it was horrifying and while true tragedy came out of it globally, it got us to where we need to get to. And shame on us if we don't.
Yeah, we can truly do it in Aotearoa. I mean, we're in an incredibly blessed position in terms of creating like energy independence and having our own sort of own value system and being self-sufficient, and so many things we can create models that we can export around the world and ideas. We've got to move beyond it being, so tourism has been amazing, but we need to rapidly start thinking about exporting ideas and exporting intangible things and our stories and things like that we can get out to the world. It's but yeah, and Lee, it's yeah, our job is going to be inspiring, I reckon.
Yeah, so let's get on with it.
Yeah, plant the seeds.
More normal people running for politics, please.
What's the normal person?
Someone without vested interest, to be quite honest.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Cleve. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Appreciate you heading down the road to be able to do that and be with us and just really enjoy having your energy.
Wouldn't miss it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm mute now.
Okay, ka whai. And Lou, thank you for that. No words, that was on point. And luckily been joined by our other two questioners, but it looks like Talei is having some difficulties with her Wi-Fi, because we didn't need more of that tonight. So what I might do is I might just ask Kara Talei's question. But I don't know if you know Talei Kara, but she's an organizer, so she does a lot of work for rangatahi Māori in Whakatane and just like generally around that area. She was born and raised in Waimana, and yeah, she does incredible work. And so the question so we talked a little bit about you and what you do, and she and we came up with a question to ask you just to really speak to your expertise in your mahi. And the question was
maybe Talei's looking like she could get back on.
She might. Talei, I reckon you might be all good if you unmute, and then you can. Oh, yep, we got you.
Can you hear me? Oh, kia ora.
Got you.
Hi. So I was in my shed, so I thought I'd come closer to the Wi-Fi. Yeah. Hi. Oh yeah. So yeah, my name's Talei. I'm from Whakatane, 23 years old. I'm half Fijian, half Kiwi, but born and bred here in Waimana. Yeah, so pretty much the question that we came up was for Kara, that's how you say it?
All right.
Okay, cool. Do you think that there is an opportunity to decolonise during the recovery of the coronavirus?
Kia ora. Tūtaringa mihi atu nā ki a koe e te tuane. Mai te waimana kaku, nei rāna taku mihi atu ki a koe tētahi o ngā uri mai te wai kaukau, te rā pito o te rohe pōtai o tūhoi, nei rāna taku mihi. Oh, totally. But I much prefer to use the word re-indigenizing as opposed to decolonizing. I think we sort of we try to compare ourselves by sort of undoing something that's already happened to us. Why don't we use what we already know, which is founded in Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways of doing, being, and acting. And I guess it's already been spoken about by Chloe and others around how Indigenous knowledge is going to be a sort of a foundation for how we transition through this next phase of our growth, of our development, how we move out of COVID and respond to the challenges which were there before, and as Louise say, they'll only be exacerbated by what's happening right now. And I guess if we look at, so once I get out of my bubble and into mahi, I'll be starting a new role within Hutt City Council, and part of my work will be around supporting, well, I'll actually be responsible for development and economy within the Hutt City. And if we look at the Hutt Valley within the Wellington, it's got the highest Māori population. We've got huge, significant unemployment and big problems in social housing. And so I come from a planning background, and I just really see that as we transition through this phase, that there's a real opportunity for how we actually reset and look at housing. How do we redesign our communities that are founded on Indigenous values, principles, and ways of being. How do we integrate? How do we create opportunities where these new houses, which will create and boost our economy, are also reducing our impact on the environment? How do we use solar? How do we put water tanks in homes, so we're collecting our own rainwater, but also we're not creating that much of an impact on our over consumed river and aquifers, which are just over allocated at the moment. And you see them in the summertime and they're suffering and they're dying. So how do we create systems in ways that we are giving back to Papatuanuku, that we're giving back to our ecosystem and living within an interdependent system, as opposed to a dependent system? I guess in some ways we look to Tūhoe and what they've done with the living building in Tāne Atua, and they've also got one now in Waikare Moana, and also in Te Tii. They're using that ethos and mentality of coexisting with the environment, and seeing how you work and use tikanga and tikanga Māori to just be who you are, which is incredibly exciting. And now we've got Victoria University, who are also taking up the challenge with their Living Pa project, and turning their complex into the Te Kaua Māori or Maui into a living building, conforming to the Living Building Challenge. So, if universities are taking on these big challenges, because it is a challenge, I've been a part of the process, and my goodness, how do you deal with all sorts of water issues within Kelburn, on top of the Bloomin' Hill, where you've got no land, you've got stuff all there. But if they can do it, and if they can bite off the big chunk of these complex issues like universities and big organizations, then hopefully the flow-on effect means that the smaller guys can actually buy into it, can actually, solar becomes affordable, all these other things become affordable because the big guys have already spent their money and sort of broken the back of it. And at the moment, we're doing some work, the iwi are doing some work with New Zealand Transport Agency, and they're big guys too, with big dollars. So how can we influence them to change their mode of operation and how they see things and do things, and influence more positive outcomes in that space as well? And it's at the same time re-indigenizing our environments. So there's the embedded element of making sure that we are living in a way which is honourable, and that is coexisting with Papatuanuku, but also at the same time that when we're redeveloping our cities, when these shovel-ready projects get off the line, and mana whenua are there involved, they look like us. They look like the New Zealand. They look Māori. They perform to our ideals and values and ways of viewing things. And I live in Wellington, and there's not that many features within Wellington that speak to my identity, my whakapapa. There might be a few po here, scattered around the place, but I see this as an opportunity to re-indigenize our cityscapes that once were papakainga and kainga and marakai and punawai and all those sorts of beautiful things. So I'm incredibly excited to see how we go. I think there are going to be some significant challenges as we move forward. I think there's an appetite to change things and to rethink things, but I feel as though that because I just feel as though if we don't push hard enough, if we don't build our tribes, our collective tribes, then we will get caught in inertia. And if we get caught in inertia, then the status quo remains. So I guess the quicker we can put the wheels to the ground and make sure that we've got a stable waka that can get us somewhere, the better. And I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that want that. I guess it's sort of the analogy to the bike as well. And let's hope that that waka is a really cool waka with koru patterns all over it and blasting all sorts of rasta music, and is just, you know, vibrant and representative of who we are as Aotearoa, New Zealand. So yeah, I totally think that there's a huge opportunity to re-indigenize our landscape and our economy in a whole number of different ways, and providing for the needs of our people at the same time. It's just about putting into place what we actually value. And if we value those things, we'll invest in them. And that's all we need to do. Simple as that. Kia ora.
Simple. I want to get on that waka, especially right now. But thank you. I'm really looking forward to the living pa in Kelvin as well. And also the hut are very lucky to have you. And I'm sure I speak for us all when I say that we're all really looking forward to seeing the mahi that you do there and everywhere, because you are a jack of all trades. So ngā mihi for that. And I'm going to start phasing decolonize and start including and using a re-indigenize, because it's powerful language and it's positive language, and it's not deficit-based thinking. So ngā mihi for that. I definitely took a few pieces of mātauranga from that. Thank you, Kara. And kia ora. And now Marlon, who's been eagerly waiting with a smile on his face the whole time, to ask David his question. And thank you, David, for sticking around. Actually, fun fact, this time, pre-COVID, David was meant to be interviewing me on a panel about climate change, but as the lockdown has happened, we've reversed now, and now I'm asking the questions, but I'm actually not. Sorry, Marlon, you jump in, have a little.
Now I'm asking the question.
And ask your question.
Kia ora, and I've actually really enjoyed waiting here and sitting here and waiting here and listening, because it's been an amazing kōrero and it's been really fantastic to listen to. But David, now the spotlight is on you. So kia ora everybody, my name is Marlon Drake. I am first and foremost student of Vic. Well, actually, first and foremost, I'm from Auckland, but I'm now studying at Vic in Wellington. And I'm studying a law degree, which I have to tell everyone about, and I'm in my second to last year. But I'm also the incoming living wage organiser for the Wellington region as well. And I've been a part of the living wage movement for the last 4 or 5 years or so. So my question for you, as someone who's been campaigning on a number of progressive issues, not just the living wage, for a while now, what is a careful revolution, and why do we have to be so damn careful?
Kia ora, Marlon. That's a good question. And let me let me start with the revolution first. The revolution is inevitable. Like there's so much of it which is about physical, material, scientific elements, the sorts of things that Chloe was talking about on the outer ring of the donut, the planetary boundaries. I mean, you know, we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, it's warming the planet, that has impacts. There's no denying that. As much as people do try to deny it, reality will bite back eventually. And when reality bites back, people will push even harder for change. And so the revolution is inevitable. You know, the renewable energy transition is already happening. It's got its own momentum anyway. There's no pulling that back now. But revolutions are disruptive. They push people out of their livelihoods. They push people out of familiar ways of life. You know, that's often a real point of pride in sort of revolutionary thinking. I always think of Facebook and their slogan, "Move fast, break things." You know, that being their kind of the slogan for the digital revolution. But of course, you know, they've been responsible for all sorts of disruptions that they hadn't really prepared for, and that caused a lot of harm and harm for people. So there's a disruptive element which can which can have a positive side, but also a negative side. And then another kind of classic feature of revolutions is there's a great line about the French Revolution that it ended up devouring its own children. It's sort of they end up creating more sort of social unrest and social problems, and sort of undermining that legitimacy that they originally, you know, the revolution was there to represent the people, but eventually it starts to harm the people if some of those disruptions are too strong, and that kind of starts to degrade what Chloe was talking about on the inner ring of the donut. You're starting to undermine that that buy-in and that sense of legitimacy for what's going on. And so if that happens, then you start to get resistance, you start to get pushback, you start to get protests, you even might end up having a counter-revolution where all of the progress you made is reversed completely. And that is a very common story in the history of revolutions. And so this is the real problem for the climate movement and every other kind of movement, is how do you make change, and how do you transform things without creating the pushback, which is so bad that it ends up stalling change or completely undoing change. And at the end of the day, when, as far as the atmosphere is concerned, you know, a counter-revolution is just as unsuccessful as this we'd never tried in the first place. You could kind of imagine, you know, that you could undo all of that progress so much. So then the careful bit is to try and be the antidote to some of those negative tendencies of revolutions. And there's an aspect of caring for one another, and there's also an aspect of being careful. And I mean, I think the carefulness comes down to, you know, there's an idea of a duty of care where we think about, you know, what are the foreseeable consequences of our actions, and what are the sorts of unintended consequences which might come out. And this is especially important in policy making. You know, like one of the major levers we have is the emissions trading scheme, but you know, one of the effects that it has is that it weighs heavier on lower income households than upper income households. It has a inequity built into it, the way that the carbon price you know, weighs down on different communities. And so there's an element there of you know, that climate policy, while it's for the right reasons, it might have perverse effects. So that's kind of being careful about policy making. But then there's the other element of being caring, and you know, that's really being responsive to the needs of others, and especially having a concern for groups that are vulnerable, for people who are more exposed or lack the adaptive capacity for dealing with change. And you know, that's a crucial issue for climate change, but it's also become very apparent with the COVID issue, as Kato was talking about earlier. You know, some communities, because of certain health outcomes, are much more vulnerable to a respiratory disorder, or have you know, not the same access to health facilities and so on. And so there's real questions there around who's at risk and who bears the most risk. And that ties into the inequity element as well, which I think is the other concern. And, you know, if we're sort of caring for one another through the low emissions transition, we need to take care of how some of those inequity effects might play out in policy. You know, the ETS example being one, but you know, there's multiple other examples of just, yeah, are the resources going to the right people? You know, a lot of climate policy might end up not going to the communities who need it most, or exacerbating existing inequalities that are already there. And so that's another consideration to take into consideration. But I mean, you know, why we have to be so careful. There was a great line that I heard recently, because I think like the just transition is one of the sort of better examples of this kind of thinking in place, where you're thinking, you know, a certain industrial sector or a certain business has to change radically, and so part of the just transition is acknowledging the sorts of disruptions that they face, and then trying to put in place some labour policy to help them through that transition, whether it's upskilling them or reskilling them into other sectors, or helping with forms of compensation or assistance to go into other jobs and so on. And there's a line that, to speak to the issue that you raised, you know, a just transition doesn't mean a slow transition. It's not the same as a slow transition. Like in fact, you know, I would argue that if just transition done right is kind of the quickest transition of all, because it's going to get that support from the people whose livelihoods are at stake. And it's also going to have longevity, because, you know, if people have some buy-in and have some sort of sense of being involved in those decisions as well, then they're not as likely to sort of push back and protest in the way that they will if they perceive that this transition is being forced upon them. So that's really why that's the thinking behind this idea of a careful revolution, that if we do this, you know, we have to accept that it is going to be disruptive, and some people are going to face those impacts from the low emissions transition. And of course, you know, those impacts aren't as bad as climate change itself, but we still have to recognize the harm and disruption there. And then if we do as much as we can to minimize some of those disruptions and to make it, you know, to help people flourish in the new environment, then it's going to be much more successful, much swifter, and have much more sustainability as a social change.
That was super. That was super mean. That was super interesting. And it's something I always think about it in campaigns when, you know, like in terms of organising. My dog. Organising needs to always be as progressive as the policy that you're fighting for, and just as caring as what you're trying to do. My dog's starting to growl now, so I'm just going to mute myself. But thanks for that, David. That was fascinating.
No worries. Cheers, Marlon.
That was awesome. And just, I think, you know, despite the rarus at the beginning of the Zoom, I can still see quite clearly what this is looking like, because we've had Chloe and David have really kind of set the parameters around how we recover, and really set those kind of bottom lines in terms of our environment and caring for people. And those are really those bottom lines, or I guess not lines, but circles. And then within that donut, you know, Louise has talked about how we can function on a day-to-day, you know, on day-to-day, and thinking about small things like what we're buying and where we're buying from, and the impact that has, and that kind of fits within that donut. And then Kara has talked about re-indigenizing spaces, and that always will fit within those parameters, because I think an Indigenous way of doing things never exploits or moves beyond those parameters in the first instance. And I think the important thing about re-indigenizing is it's something that everybody can do. It's not only for Indigenous people. Of course, we need to lead that, because we're not in a place where the infrastructure is there for people to be able to live in an Indigenous lifestyle. But once we have that, and we can re-indigenize Aotearoa, it's something that everybody can get behind. So I really like the way that all of those answers kind of shape the picture, and it does look to me like a very circular picture. So thank you for that. We just have two questions that we got beforehand. Obviously there were a lot in that Q&A box, which is why it crashed, I think. But and there were some really good questions in there, and people from across Aotearoa, so I'm glad we can give this to them soon as well. But so I've looked at the questions, and we've just picked out two here. I'm thinking the first one will be for Chloe and David, and then the second is for Lou and Kara. So the first question, and don't feel you need to go into too much depth, or don't feel like you have to do too much of a short answer. Just do whatever you're comfortable with. And it's around inequality. And so this is for Chloe and David. And what this person said was, shouldn't we be paying essential workers more because they are keeping society? And what about a UBI and a wealth tax? So I know that's a big partai, but I mean, feel free to do with that what you want. And yeah, and then we'll move on to another partai for Kara and Lou.
Man, you're gonna fight. take the first bite of it, David? All right, me as. Yeah, I want to say ka pai to Marlon for his mahi on raising the profile of living wage over the past few weeks in particular. Your op-ed, mate, I shared that on my Facebook channels, and just the kōrero that it has instigated has been off the charts. And I think what it's demonstrated is now more than ever, people have, as Louise was prior saying, an appetite or a hunger or an understanding for these inequalities that previously existed. And in the words of Iona Holstead, you know, the Secretary of Education, you know, the pandemic didn't create inequality, it simply exposed it. And the kind of break from the so-called normality that we have has offered us an opportunity to evaluate that. And I really like to pick up on the things that David's spoken about, particularly with regards to taking a sense of design or purpose or intention into how we move forward here. Because the kind of notion of breaking things, we're talking about people's lives here, and we cannot be careless when we're talking about people's lives and livelihoods. But I also think that all of this kōrero tonight has demonstrated to me the need to tell both sides of the story. You know, based on the kind of political kaupapa that I come from, I'm frequently told that you either fall into the social justice camp or the ecological camp. But as we have demonstrated, as Kate's model, Kate Rayworth, you know, donut economics model of thinking, and as all modern wellbeing economics has started to showcase, is that you can't solely contemplate the environment or solely people. You have to understand that both of them are fundamentally interdependent on each other. And what this pandemic has demonstrated as well is our interdependence on each other as a broader society. I've started to kind of try and envision this in the format of, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the kind of way of thinking at its very base, we all need to have access to the basics of shelter, food, water, and then you move up the ladder and you start to be able to embrace things like community, and, you know, you get further and further up the chain and find things like self-actualization, meaningful work, mental well-being, and all the rest. And there's almost this really inbuilt notion at the moment in this hyper-individualized world that has flourished, much to, I think, actually the deficit of many of us, of hyper-individualization over the past kind of few decades, kind of the world that definitely me, Marlon, Tam, and possibly Talei all grew up in. And probably, I'm not guessing any ages, but I'm saying I was born in 1994, which is 2 years after student loans were introduced. So back to my original point, it's that all of this stuff, you know, you need to understand that when you move one policy lever, other stuff moves. So you think about taking into account the environment, all of a sudden you put into place emissions pricing. All of a sudden that impacts prices, which can have a detrimental impact on particularly those who are at, you know, the bottom of the inequality kind of spectrum. And you know, when you talk about things like the living wage, for example, regularly the first thing that comes up is that, oh, well, people are going to lose jobs. And I think this probably pertains to some of the things that Louise might speak about, but ultimately it's that we have to discern whether as a society we are comfortable with the notion that profit makers, those being workers, should be exploited in order to make businesses exist, and theoretically that means that more jobs exist, when actually it just doesn't bear out in the evidence. But we also know that facts don't necessarily change feelings or the ways that people see the world. So the kind of real fascinating thing to me with Marlon's op-ed is how people right now understand the importance of essential workers, but they were always essential. It just happens that the circumstances have shifted, and for the first time that spotlight is on them because they are having to leave their homes and their bubbles when the rest of us aren't. And I worry about the sense of transience with which we are prescribing a solution. That being saying, hey, you know, maybe we should give essential workers hazard pay, and maybe we should be giving, you know, those who sit at the top of the wealth pyramid pay cuts. We're not talking about taxation increases, nor are we talking about increases in the minimum wage. We're talking about these things as though they are temporary or a state of being that changes with the circumstances that befall us. And when we do that, we talk as though we are comfortable with inequality only existing in normality. And I find that the most mind-blowing thing of all of this, that we are cognizant of how unequal things were beforehand, but we're less comfortable with it right now. So I think we need to kind of take that value set and those stories of compassion and that sense of interdependence and connection that we're currently celebrating and go, this is the model that we need to take moving forward, and be really, really intentional about that. And ultimately, on the question of UBI and stuff, I've got this question a lot because I've been doing these live streams every day it was actually something that came as an idea from Holly Donald, who I'm really stoked is now the advisor to the Prime Minister, so it's helping us through this COVID response, but she was formerly Green Party policy advisor. And I hit Holly up a few days before we went into a level 3 lockdown and was just like, hey, I've no idea how best to help you or anybody right now. You are like advising the PM, how do I best help you, or, you know, feed things through the kaupapa of caucus or whatever. And Holly was just like, you know, we're doing our thing, you continue to do the political thing, but you also have the privilege of this cultural platform. And the most important thing that you can do right now is to continue facilitating these conversations, let people know things will be okay if we all stick to the plan, stick to the rules, but also you can use that as an opportunity to facilitate conversations into the future. And it's been amazing seeing the kind of revolutionary ideas that have come out of people's kind of mouths or keypads, as you know, the case is. But the idea of the UBI, which was previously seen as this real fringe idea, is so commonplace, and it's such the time is ripe for it. But we talk about the UBI in a vacuum and without considering how it's going to be funded nor made sustainable. And the only way that we meaningfully do that and meaningfully get to any level of universal or guaranteed basic income that doesn't undercut the welfare that certain people in society across certain demographics, whether they're solo mothers or those with disabilities or otherwise, actually need, is to provide meaningful taxation of wealth. And I could go on this massive rant because I've just read Thomas Piketty's second book. So I'm going to save you that. But long story short, I'm just going to say that all of this stuff sounds mega theoretical until you start to unpack it and recognize that politics is literally just decisions made by people. And that all of that stuff, all of the things that we take for granted, whether they are inequality or the sense of participation or the fact that politics sucks. If you think politics sucks, recognize that it sucks either because you voted for it or you neglected to vote for an alternative. Okay, in a country as small as ours, with 2 degrees of separation, the population of Melbourne, where somebody like me, who's a high school dropout with tattoos, who swears too much, can get elected, anybody can be a parliamentarian. And that is demonstrative of our ability to be egalitarian if we want to be. It is demonstrative of our ability to change if we want to. So I just call everyone out who complains about stuff and says they're not political to recognize that inherent in that complaining is your political motive. So please don't complain on your Facebook page. Go and get organized with folks. Follow Marlon Drake and Tamatha Paul and Councillor Thomas Nash and just change shit. Yeah.
So I mean, I could talk about wealth taxes and UBIs and so on, but I actually think I think that's not really the most important thing. It is just, you know, we have to have that conversation as a nation, and in my opinion, doesn't really matter compared to the opinions of everybody out there. And what's most important is that we just are open to all ideas, and I think the challenge and the scale of the challenge requires that, and we've already seen overseas all sorts of things which were considered things which were inconceivable for central banks and policymakers to go and do. The Bank of England has recently been doing overt monetary financing where they're not even the government's not even incurring debt by getting that money. Debt jubilees is on the cards as well, for especially at the international level, for indebted nations, but it's even in policy conversations at the domestic level where people who have been massively or unfairly indebted may well be you know, if there's a push for it, all these things are possible. There may well be jubilees and things, and so there's many policy instruments, and we just need to have an open and honest conversation about all of them. And then I think just to pick up on the inequality thing, I think, you know, tautoko all that Chloe said before, but one thing I'd maybe tease out as well is just the role that inequality plays in us being susceptible and exposed to shocks like this. Like, you know, inequality is one of the things which makes us vulnerable as a society to a shock like this. It makes, you know, one group of people more vulnerable to the disease and the health effects, and this can play out in all sorts of different ways. And one example which has been quite striking is the resurgence of COVID-19 in Singapore, because it seemed as though Singapore had got on top of the issue. But of course, Singapore only ever thinks about its citizens and not its migrant workers, which makes up a huge proportion of the population, hundreds of thousands in a country that is a similar population to ours, only a little larger. And the disease was basically going through all of these dormitory rooms for migrant workers and being sustained through that. And now, you know, is incredibly difficult to manage for the wider population, because, you know, a lot of the Singaporean citizens rely on them for all sorts of basic needs. They're part of the care workers of Singapore, and so the wider society relies on them and can't do without them. And so the disease is resurging and recirculating again. And so, I mean, I think that is a really stark example of inequality in action and leaving a society more vulnerable to shocks like this. And, you know, unfortunately, this won't be the only shock of this nature. And, you know, I mean, I'm an advisor on the Auckland Climate Action Framework, and we're trying to think through some of these issues. And, you know, certainly on the social side, you can see large overlaps between who is vulnerable to the disease like this and who is vulnerable to impacts of climate change. Certainly climate change is different in some regards because some of the impacts can be quite geographically specific, you know, especially if you're living close to a coastline. But then if you lack the resources, if you lack the social connections and so on, you're going to find bouncing back from those impacts more difficult in the same way that you're going to struggle in the situation that we find ourselves now in. And so I think that's the key thing, is to think about all of these things, such as inequality and reducing climate risk, especially in this frame of how do we build a more secure and stable future for ourselves, because I think that's something everyone can get on board with, especially, you know, with the current experience fresh in their mind.
Yes, absolutely. And now I'm going to go on to the second question, and this is for Lou and Kara. And this one is about localization. So with the changes that are coming as a result of this pandemic, should we be doing more to promote localization?
Yeah, I'll go. It's not necessarily the need to promote it, right? You know, we are now in a localized economy. You know, yes, we're extraordinarily lucky that the stuff we export can still be exported, you know, and more into the thought process, and, you know, more about what we're selling on, you know, in tech, and being able to sell big ideas, is what was said before, that, you know, we can do that, and hopefully we can meet the demand that may return in a global market. But the fact is, we are still in a global market. We are, somebody said to me yesterday, it might have been today, gosh, I don't know when it was, you know, we are a leaf in the ocean when it comes to the global economy. You know, we don't have a lot of sway in being able to drive global economic performance. What we have is the ability to do it here. And whether we are thinking about our own whānau and what we're doing as far as what we're buying, what we're investing, what we're selling, you know, all of that becomes, what can we do to keep, you know, everybody in an inclusive economy. And how can you look at where are you buying your stuff from? You know, I heard it on the radio today where someone was saying, look, you know, I think it was Grant Robinson was saying, yeah, you know, international packages are still coming over the border. Well, why don't you look and see, can you buy that thing from a New Zealand business? Can we retain the money here so that we all start to see more equality, more access to prosperity? You know, yes, the big conversation has been, where are you going to go on your trips? Where are you going to travel? You know, of course, the choices now are limited to what exists within Aotearoa New Zealand. But that's always been here. We've always had the ability to understand and support local businesses, go to places maybe that we had only read about. You know, we need to own that now, and we need to support our economy to be as resilient as it can, because as David said, this is not going to be the first rodeo. You know, we will see things like this happening. You know, maybe, you know, to Chloe's point, maybe not in my generation, but maybe yours, I don't know. But we will see it, we will see things like this again. And what we can do is demonstrate to the world, as we are doing now, that we absolutely have the ability to be resilient. But that requires us all to contribute to that. And that is something that it's going to be painful, but hopefully what we'll see off the back of this is at the whānau level, at the small business level, at the big end of town, at the charitable level, we will see resilience, and we will be focused on what really matters. And it is our local economy and ensuring there is inclusivity and prosperity within it.
High five to that. Yeah, I don't think I can sort of add much more really, other than I guess, you know, we've got to think local, we've got to act local, we've got to employ local, we've got to get our produce locally. You know, I remember watching on the news, I think it must have been like sort of week 1 or 2 into lockdown, and the tulip farmer I think it was in the Hawke's Bay, who was just mowing over his tulips because he couldn't sell them, but Countdown, etc., were purchasing flowers from an international supplier. It was quite sad to see that, but you know, I guess from a Māori perspective, you know, this is an opportunity for us to really start to get more of our people who currently aren't in employment or will no longer be in employment because of COVID-19 for whatever reason, into new industries, into employment, into new trade, and sort of create that circular economy. It was actually quite interesting when Kate was talking about the sourdough. My girlfriend's actually baking a sourdough right now. She's kneading it right now. She's airing it right now. And we've been sharing the bug around. The bug's called Stanley, and it was her sister's bug, and I think it came all the way from the UK. So it's quite cool, and we've been sharing the bread with my grandfather and family and all that sort of stuff. So we've created our own sort of little local economy of barter, basically, and we've been able to get some mum gave us some meat and all sorts of other things. So it's quite cool. But I guess in sort of the local systems and the local players is going to be incredibly important for us. But I think the key thing that we've got to try and do is, we can talk about all these things as much as we like, and it's always been a good idea, you know, support local, do procurement. It's nothing new. It's not novel. It's something that everyone's been trying to do for a long time. So I guess quite keenly, how do we focus on unlearning the process that has created what we've got at the moment, which is a dependence on buying and importing things in? So how do we unlearn those systems and relearn a new system, or relearn an old system, a sort of a back to the future approach to how we do things? And I think that's going to be the behavioral shift. That's going to be the difficult part, I think, but how do we create measures that force us to move in that direction, and policy instruments. So sort of leaning on our politicians, and what are the policy instruments that are going to facilitate the behavioural shifts that are going to enable that localism, that local focus. And even if we look at local government at the moment, one of their key things is localism, right? It's one of their sort of their key pillars at the moment. So how do we leverage that identity, that approach which is already there? And I think keenly for our Māori communities, it's something that we want to be able to do as well. And housing is a key area that we're sort of focused in on right now, is the provision of housing, whether it's through papakainga or social housing and all those sorts of things. But we want to be able to ensure that we can actually employ our people into those jobs, and so and we can generate income, and they could possibly buy a home. How crazy is that idea? But it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of effort. But the first thing is we've got to have the vision to do it. We've got to want to do it. And if there's a want, it'll get done. So yeah, I'm excited about what we can do, and if we can get big institutions, big organizations, big groups to start thinking like this and start leading forward, and again breaking the camel's back of it, then they'll just sort of create the floodgates will open, and if we can influence some big dogs to lead the way, and follow the others that are already been doing it anyway, that would be awesome. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Tim? Sorry, just as a follow-up to Kara, just on that point, and particularly around, threading the needle of LGNZ and the push for localism, but also looking at potential central government solutions, whether it is things like Māori wards, and then, kind of embodying re-indigeneity and tangata tiriti, tangata whenua kind of relationships. Thinking about institutions that kind of maximise the opportunity for communities to come together, whether it's our libraries or our town halls, virtual or physical, and exhibition spaces and kind of spaces that are owned by local governments that are intended to facilitate people coming together or congregating, our local parks, all of those things. What do you envision as the role of particularly iwi and hapu and places like marae in the 21st century as we move forward in kind of catalysing that space for community and re-indigeneity?
Oh, yeah, for me,
this is a small question, bro.
that's a huge question. Have we got enough time? Yeah, that's a huge question, but I guess my hope, my desire is that our marae become more relevant within our modern day society. I think within our rural environments and regional New Zealand, our marae and our hapu are still strong and are still active, and whatever they say goes, and that's the law of the land. Within your urban environments like Wellington, Auckland, it's a different dynamic, it's a different structure, and we're gonna struggle to sort of bring our people back to our marae. So what we've got to do is, if we're going to build our communities, so one of the big issues that we have in our big urban centres is housing, obviously, and housing for our people. And so how do we create those hubs within those communities that we're going to create that might not necessarily be a marae or a wharenui, but at least a place for our people to come together and to uphold that sense of community and to practice our traditions and just to be together. And for us, it's been quite a, in one of the housing projects that we're doing at the moment is, do we want to put a marae in this community? And the question, there's some people going, well, that's a huge responsibility. You've got to man it, you've got to work it, you've got to do all those sorts of things, and you've got to uphold those principles and tikanga. It's a beautiful thing to have, but it's a lot of work. And then the others, yeah, we're keen, we'll be there every day. There's a tangi, there's a hui, there's a whakatau, we'll be there. And so you've got those sorts of changing dynamics and views on how we want to do these sorts of things. And I'm excited about having those conversations, because those are real conversations. I'm really missing being in my marae, my tupuna whare. I'm missing the human dynamics of marae politics. I'm missing that social interaction. I'm missing being told what to do. Well, at a large scale, everyone telling you what to do. I'm being told, I miss being told to sit down. All those sorts of things that build character, as they say. So, I think our marae will always play a crucial role in who we are, in our identity as a nation. And within Wellington, again, there was a whole number of Māori who migrated to Wellington, to Auckland, to get jobs and sort of as a part of that urban drift. And one of the key things that happened there, and my grandfather and his father before him, they ensured that those local iwi from different areas who came into Wellington were able to have a space of their own and to build their own marae and to build their own spaces to be who they are, and to exercise their Māoritanga. And if you go around Wellington, you'll see there's a Tūhoi marae over there, there's a Ngāti Porou marae over there, there's a Taurahere marae. It's all an interconnected system. And just recently, all of those marae and all of those and the mana whenua marae and our iwi hub, our runanga, worked together. They pulled their resources together to get all these packs out to whānau, whether food or vouchers or the toilet paper and all those other sort of key essentials for our whānau. And all it takes is a phone call, and bang, the network is so strong and powerful. And they were able to pull together, and you see these videos on Facebook of these big trucks and delivering to our whānau, and you see all these messages on Facebook, thank you for the gift voucher, and thank you for the box of food, and thank you for all these sorts of things. And as small as it is, it's incredibly powerful and incredibly important, and sort of just proves the necessity of these social structures for our people. And the more we can support them, the more they will be incredibly important in our lives as we go forward, regardless of what happens, whether it's a tangi, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's whatever. Our people are prepared. And I think just at our marae just recently, we got a well sorted. So our whānau are going, yeah, no, we can do a full lockdown. We've got our own water. Soon we'll just have to, apparently we've got to go and get some solar panels ready for the whare, so we can be off the grid in the middle of Lower Hutt.
That's resilience though, eh? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
That was a mean kōrero kara, and I'm really interested to know where there's Tūhoi marae in Wellington. Te Reinga Waka?
Oh no, there's Te Manunu in Nainai.
Oh, Nainai. I'll need to go a little titiro, be nosy.
And there's one in Moira as well.
Oh wow.
Te Kāka no Te Aroha. Yeah.
Damn. Oh, thank you. And I just saw there is a private question in the chat from Marlon, and it literally says, Kara, you mentioned housing. How do we fix housing? But we're not going to go there today.
I had to ask. I just thought,
That's just
maybe
the whole
episode 2.
Marlon.
That's a low question. That's like worse than mine, man.
Bigger than Chloe's question and shorter in words though, but anyway, what I just wanted to say, just to really thank all of you for staying on, and I feel a million times better after actually just having this kōrero, and I'm so glad that people are still at least going to see this, because this has so much value into it, and I think people are going to be able to take so much from this. And I think the biggest thing that people can draw from this is hope, because I certainly have. And just thinking about the people who have come to ask questions, so how our presenters, our speakers have been able to address their needs, because I was talking to Talei yesterday about colonisation and how she had been thinking about that quite a lot during lockdown. I think, Kara, you've been able to really provide some real clarity in that respect. And Marlon, we talk about just transition all the time, and it was really awesome seeing Dave go into that. And also, you do your living wage organising, and I think Lou is really setting out that framework with how we can make sure that we're working with these ethical businesses that value people and planet. And Cleve, I love your energy. You straight instantly made me feel better. I can't wait for you to be on next one's on next week's one. And I felt real stink before we all had our kōrero, and it's turned into a bit of a Aotearoa town room rather than a town hall. But I think what I've learned, apart from all the gems from this kōrero, is that need to just go with the basic Zoom wins every time. Don't need to get complicated with it. Just do the Zoom. That's it. So that's cool. That's my big lesson from today. Nā reira, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou. Thank you so much for your time and for still giving it energy despite it not going exactly to plan. But we just roll with it. That's what we do. And yes.
So just to say that I've just heard from Kate, and she says she's really happy to reconvene another time, and she's just had breakfast with her kids and they ate the sourdough nut.
A good ending.
Hey Tam, just quickly, I think I speak probably on behalf of all of us. Just extraordinary tonight, and you've been amazing. Like, absolute the epitome of resilience. So be really proud of yourself. Like, not many people would have been able to get that shit sorted. So, you just rolled with it, you dealt with it, and that makes us feel pretty proud, particularly those from Paniki who voted for you. So we're glad that you sit where you sit and you're doing your mahi. So well done.
Oh, tēnā koe. Thank you, Lou. And thank you to all of you. And hopefully we'll have it all sussed for next weekend, and people will still get to see this. So that, I guess, is the main thing. And have my own recovery of my own to go and do to bloody process after this. But I just wanted to touch briefly. That's awesome about Kate. And I think what we'll do is we might get Chloe, Tom, me and Kate on a call, and we can do the original stuff just to upload that for everybody, because I was really keen to hear what she thought about Aotearoa, because she's been here, and just maybe what context she might think the circular economy and kind of donut economics might work. And the people want to hear it too, but also the people wanted to hear all of you as well. And so I'm really excited to share this now. But I just wanted to touch on next week. So a little bit of mahi to do in terms of getting that all ready for next week, but we've got some really cool people locked in. The theme for next week will be, so this one was around shaping the recovery and understanding, I guess, kind of some guidelines around how that can work, and giving people some real practical solutions as to how they can go for the next, when we move into 2 weeks of level 3, how can you support local businesses? What are the kind of things you can be thinking about or learning about in that time that we have to ourselves? And so the theme next week will be from recovery to revolution. So this is where we're going to touch on I guess, what does a revolution look like? And we touched on that tonight through Dave's kōrero about a careful revolution. And so I'm really pleased to announce our speakers. So we've got a few double ups from this week. So we've got Chloe, which would be awesome again. And I'm going to tee up someone to ask you some really long questions. Maybe I'll get Kara back. Kara, you can do some partai for Chloe. And we also have Cleve, which is going to be incredible. I cannot wait to hear all of your tales, because I've only ever dealt with you in the kind of business sense, so I can't wait to hear your wisdom as well, Cleve. We also have Jess Berenson-Shaw from Action Station, who's going to be talking about like communication and messaging, and specifically around the recovery. And we also have one of my favourite human beings and one of my personal role models, Julia Whaiporti, to talk about, she can talk about anything. She's absolutely brilliant, but I really want to hear more about just anything she wants to yarn about, but I'm really keen to hear about I guess her role in terms of decarceration, but also and her thoughts around that and COVID-19, but also around whānau, because she obviously is a senior advisor to the Children's Commissioner. And to frame it all, we have as another legend who I really, really look up to, and also Kara's uncle, we have Wairere Tamatha, and he is a legend in Aotearoa, and truly I think exemplifies revolution. You know, when you think about revolution, you can see those images of Tame, his moko, and all of the you know, incredible things that he's done in his lifetime, and the amazing foundation he's left for us, especially rangatahi Māori, and rangatahi in general, to pick up. So I guess ko motu toku kōrero, ngā mihi kia koutou. I can't wait to share this, and thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I will always appreciate this, and I will never forget this. So thank you all. I'm going to go have a beer now because I need it. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora,
Kia ora.
Big love e te whānau.
Love your work, Tam.
Yeah, good.